Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry for the delayed start. Happy that you joined us. My name is Lance Gunkel. I'm the Managing Director at Severson Strege. I am joined by our Chief Planning Officer, Matt Roberts.
Hello, everyone.
Matt, I want to make sure that your mic is up and working. How are things on your end?
I think it's working well.
All right. Well, it is this week, we were supposed to be celebrating Take Your Kids to Work Day, but I'm afraid to say that we've had Take Your Kid to Work Day for about 6 weeks now. So I don't think I'll be having my two boys join us. Matt, are your kids interested in joining the Zoom?
It's nap time at our house, so we're enjoying it for the moment.
Okay, well that sounds good. While we start here, I will remind you that if you have any questions throughout our time together, you can go to your tool area, and under Q&A, you'll see a Q&A dialog box. Please type your questions in there. We'll be collecting those throughout our time together, and Matt and I can hopefully answer anything that's top of mind for you. So our office has been closed since early March, and it's been about 6 weeks, and most of the time that feels like 6 years. Seems like a lot has happened in just a few weeks. In that time, we've seen coronavirus accelerate in Iowa and throughout the United States, but we are crossing our fingers, hoping that we're nearing the peak. We've also seen the investment markets swing wildly, both up and down. Matt, can you give us just kind of a quick rundown of what's occurred in the investment world? And the data we'll share is through today, April 23rd.
Yeah, absolutely, Lance. I'll go through that. So the S&P 500 is down 13% year to date, and while that's not good, it has come back in the month of April. It is up 8%, as Lance said, through yesterday, and the market looks to be up today. International markets are down as well, but up in April. The MSCI EP index is down 20%, but up 3% in April, so not as much as the US. And then the Barclays Aggregate Bond Index is up 5% so far this year, up 1.6% in April.
Yeah, this particular financial crisis has been somewhat unique, I would say, Matt. Unique in the sense that it's a shock on both the supply and demand sides. Supply chains have been restrained due to factories shutting down. Shipping is restricted. And then, of course, we've seen a huge reduction in demand as so much of our country and the world is now confined to a small area around their home. In addition, we have a huge number of people finding themselves suddenly unemployed. With the data that just came out today, we now have about 26 million people in the US unemployed who at the beginning of the year were employed. So that loss of employment wipes out all of the employment gains that we saw since the Great Recession. And boy, those jobs were wiped out in a hurry. We hope those are just temporary job losses, but that's a big unknown at this point. So to curtail some of the economic damage, the government's attempted to put a Band-Aid on it through stimulus packages. Matt, can you kind of give us a broad overview of some of the stimulus that's passed thus far?
Yeah, Lance, I'd be happy to. So I think what led the headlines for the CARES Act was the stimulus checks or the recovery rebates. And those were the checks that were for $1,200 per person, $2,400 for a couple. And then you could also receive $500 for dependents 17 or younger. And there were some income phase outs associated with those stimulus checks. And so it started at $75,000 for an individual and $150,000 for a married couple. So those checks are being sent out via direct deposit if you had that on file for your 2018 or 2019 tax return. Also for those folks that receive Social Security via direct deposit, it should get placed into that account as well. I know the government is having issues getting those checks into the right accounts, and for some folks, it's going to mean that they get a check in the mail, which it won't be as quick as they had hoped, but at least it's an effort at getting money into people's bank accounts that really need it. And the other big highlight from the CARES Act was the Payroll Protection Program, or the PPP. And this has been a very popular program, so much so that they used up the $350 billion originally allocated for this program. And so what it is it's loans to small businesses, 500 employees or fewer. And those funds, if used for payroll, rent, utilities, those types of items, is forgivable if used within the first 8 weeks of receiving the loan. So there is a legislation that passed the Senate yesterday and is going to hopefully pass the House today and be signed into law to release another $300 billion for this program, because there are many businesses that weren't able to take advantage. A less popular program, but I think one that small businesses should consider, is the economic injury disaster loans. And these are loans available to businesses up to $2 million with a fairly low interest rate, about 3.75%, and up to 30 years of time to pay that back. And so that's another program available to small businesses. On the personal side, there was a waiver of the required minimum distribution. I'm sure many of you that are taking that already are fully aware that you do not have to take it in 2020, but there may be circumstances where you would want to take it and take that income if you need it for cash flow purposes, or perhaps you're in a very low income tax bracket and it makes sense to get it out of the IRA account. There are a few other provisions included in there. On the charitable side, there was an allowance to take an above the line deduction of $300 for gifts to charity for those who do not itemize. And then there is also an increase on the limit that could go to charity. It was previously 60% of gross income. They increased that to 100% of gross income, and both of those apply just in 2020. So a lot to digest in the CARES Act, but we're here to help you through that.
Now, Matt, the economic fallout is likely to be large. We don't know what the full extent of that is, and we won't for quite some time. And we can't imagine that the government will make up this full shortfall. Of course, it's meant to just be a Band-Aid of sorts. Nonetheless, the market has recovered quite a bit from its low points. Do you think the investment markets have gotten ahead of themselves at all? How does one go about estimating that?
Lance, yeah, absolutely. I think the market has certainly recovered substantially from its low point. And when we look at valuation metrics, the U.S. market appears to still be overvalued at this point in time. If we see extended periods of economic decline or stagnation, then the market may not react very kindly to that. So we keep our eyes on valuation to gauge when the market is giving a red light versus a green light signal, and we fully anticipate in the current situation that there are probably there's more volatility ahead.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, let's transition for a moment to look at some of the major themes that have already started. They've been in place for a while, and we'll call them megatrends. And we can look at how they've maybe changed or accelerated due to the epidemic. So a megatrend, as we think of it, would be a long-term societal trend that will proliferate after the epidemic. And these are things that change the way that we live and work. You'll see the list there. We have technology, demographics, urbanization, climate change, and emerging global wealth. And the first megatrend that has certainly been in the spotlight during this epidemic is that of technology. And, a lot of us now that, a lot of states are under a shelter-in-place arrangement, a lot of people are working from home. And so we're seeing more and more companies doing virtual work. That's what our office has been doing now for a number of weeks. That's put extra demand upon networks that are sufficient to handle all of the technology load that we're requiring from our residential spaces. We're also seeing demand for cybersecurity. We used to have cybersecurity needs at the office place, and now we're seeing that we need that type of security in our home networks as well. We're also seeing AI, or artificial intelligence, being brought to light, and there are companies now using AI in an enhanced fashion to automate vaccine testing and to track infections. For the same purpose, we're seeing big data being used. Again, these are trends that were already in place, but is now really a focal point in trying to lessen the effects of coronavirus. A second mega trend that we're seeing in the news today is that of demographics. We know that the United States is an aging population, and in short order, we will see a scenario where there are more grandparents alive than there are grandchildren. So that's really impacted the amount of investment dollars that are flowing to companies that focus on genomics and immunology. Now, both of these areas are far outside of my area of expertise, but I do know that in genomics, the folks there are analyzing genes and their interrelationships, and they're used to identify their combined influence. So this could impact how we are able to identify vaccines that have the biggest impact. And the same goes for immunology. The other megatrends that we won't touch on quite as long, but I think they're worth pointing out a little bit here is the first is urbanization. Right now, about 3/4 of the US lives in big cities, and we anticipate that a lot of the stimulus that will be voted on down the road will impact infrastructure. The infrastructure in the US is in need of upgrades, and we're likely to see a lot of that take place in urban areas. The next is climate change and the growing amount of investments that's going towards clean energy. We expect that to continue. And then lastly, we're seeing emerging global wealth. We anticipate that there are 1 to 2 billion people across the globe that will enter the middle class in the next few decades. So, we're already in that situation here in the US, but there's so much of the emerging world that is finally starting to see some economic prosperity and bring people into a situation where they're able to enjoy the middle class. So we thought it was interesting just to highlight 5 of the big trends that we see playing out over the very long horizon. So a reminder to you, if you have questions for me or Matt, you can use your Zoom tools and click on the Q&A dialog box. That'll bring you to an area where you can insert a question for us. Matt, one question that came in from a client, it was actually yesterday, was asking about the impact on the younger generations and how they are facing a huge student loan burden, while also for those that graduated in the early 2000s, they've now found themselves in a job market where they first got hit by the Great Recession in 2008 and are now hit with this economic decline. So kind of 2 big impact events, and yet they still have these large student loans to deal with. This is quite different than prior generations who were able to secure a college degree and were, could be fairly well assured that they'd be able to take a job that would enable them to prosper. That's not the case so much now. I believe that it will take a while for the economic impact of this to flow up to other people. Right now, it's causing the younger generations to be unable to purchase starter homes. When you're that in debt and you have kind of a shaky job outlook, that will make it harder to put down a down payment on a home. And if it's harder to buy a starter home, we'll then see it work itself up to the higher level homes. It then becomes harder to buy a middle level home or one of the nicer homes. So as the boomer generation considers selling their residence and moving into maybe a downsized home or a senior living community, it may be harder to sell that property over time. The question the client posed, I think it has the answer on how to solve that is probably somewhat political in nature. It may take some political assistance. And we've seen that the younger generation has tended to favor those politicians who have programs to help with student loan debt. I don't know where that will go, but we can see that the millennial generations and younger may not be able to have as much disposable income as older generations. I rambled on there, Matt. Do you have any thoughts to share with the group?
Lance, it certainly is, a somewhat of a political issue in terms of, how you help these folks that have taken on huge student loans to get through school, and maybe they weren't able to use their degree for their intended field, and so they end up in a position where they've got this huge student loans and they don't have the income to really support paying those student loans back. So, that is a huge issue that this entire country will have to deal with. But I think beyond what the government may do, I think, what we can do specifically as financial advisors is provide financial literacy for those groups and help them make better decisions when going into college in terms of what field they go into, how to pay for it. And certainly once they get out of college, how to prioritize, paying for debt and getting that paid down and saving for retirement, saving for a house, and helping them navigate through that. So I think financial literacy definitely needs to be improved in this country. And, it starts at the high school level and should continue its way through college into the next phase of life. And so I think through that is the path toward, making progress so these younger generations can be as successful as the prior ones.
Yeah, Matt, that's an excellent point with the financial literacy. One of our company's co-founders, David Strege, has been promoting financial literacy. He's been on the board of NEFI, which promotes financial education. So if anyone listening has an interest in passing along some financial learning materials, you can do a search for NEFI, which is NEFE. I don't have their website domain off the top of my head, but do a search for NEFI and that can connect you to some resources. And we're also happy to help in that regard as well. We can definitely put in front of you some tools to pass along. Matt, we have a lot of clients listening in, and I think one area that I would challenge them to use some time to think about is, we have this extra time at home now, and maybe consider whether any priorities or interests or goals have changed. These big life events or things that happen to us can impact what we want for the future. And so if you look at the financial plan that you put together with your planning team, in the beginning will be a list of your goals and objectives. And they can be short-term, medium-term, long-term. Take a look at what you've listed previously and think about if those are the same goals and objectives that you would put down today. Or if you want to add any to the list, and bring those to your planning team the next time you meet. I think it's a great time to reassess goals during this time. Matt, as you're talking and meeting with clients over these past few weeks, have you noticed that any have changed their objectives as a result of everything that's taking place?
Lance, yeah, I have not seen a lot of clients change their goals objectives, but I have had a lot of questions about whether they should based on the current environment. And my advice to them is, this type of environment that we're in wasn't foreseen by anybody. Nobody could have predicted COVID-19. However, we did know at some point we were going to see a market downturn. So from that perspective, this was baked in to our planning process. And so, when we help you, plan for buying a vacation home or plan for retirement, we have to take into consideration, what if the worst case scenario happens? And it starts with making sure that you have appropriate cash reserves based on, your living expenses. We want at least 3 to 6 months of living expenses on hand in cash. Then, any known cash needs in the next 12 months, we want those in cash as well. So, through those goals, we'll discover those cash needs and have it positioned appropriately. So when these types of events happen, we're ready for it, and we don't have to alter the course.
Yep, great advice. I'm being told here the website for NEFI for the financial literacy tools is nefi.org. So that's nefe.org. Matt, there's a question related to student loans and the pandemic. It's my understanding that there was passed some legislation that said that student loan debt payments may be put on pause during this pandemic. Matt, is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, correct, Lance. Yeah, student loans received a forbearance through my understanding is through September 30th. And so, that was a way to help, a very vulnerable group financially to get through this. As many of them, may have, their job may have been affected by COVID-19.
Yes. And just for clarification, what was passed was not any loan payment for forgiveness, but rather those payments will be tacked on at the end. So it's definitely more of a pause than a reprieve.
Correct.
Yep. Matt, we had a question pop up about the craziness in the oil markets. We saw that, a day or two ago, the futures price of oil actually went negative, which is a situation that is somewhat unheard of. The best I can explain that is that it's kind of a nuance in the futures market where those people who held oil futures contracts, and those contracts for May are set to expire soon. And there is such an excess supply of oil right now that those investors holding those contracts did not want to try to store the oil anywhere. And so they would rather pay to get rid of those contracts and not try and have to deliver and store the oil someplace. So that's why we had this very curious negative price of oil in the futures market. Now, of course, that doesn't mean we're going to see free gas at the gas pumps. It just somewhat of an anomaly there. Did I get that right, Matt?
Yes, Lance. And, I think for a lot of the oil producers out there that, there's a certain level, especially in the US, that a certain price per barrel that they need in order to even just break even. And there's a higher cost in the US versus other areas. And so, that cost is anywhere from $40 to $60 a barrel. And so if you're, $15 per barrel or below, that's not a winning proposition. So many are not pumping oil out of the ground right now in hopes that oil prices will recover. And we do anticipate that they will recover, as we recover from, the COVID-19 financial crisis, as people, begin driving again and traveling. But that will undoubtedly take some time.
Yeah, that's right. The markets will sort this out just as they always do. Producers will stop or slow production for a period of time. That will slowly drive up the price, and eventually we will all be driving again or driving more frequently. Once factories are able to open up to something closer to full capacity, that'll also drive the demand for fossil fuels. So prices should correct themselves over time. Matt, I'm not seeing any other questions in the hopper for us. I spoke too soon. We just had one pop up. Uh, Matt, this is a pretty typical question that we get from our clients who have adult children. And the question is it more wise to assist the children with their auto or mortgage payments, or recommend that the adult children work with their lenders on their own? Any framework that our clients can use there to aid in that decision?
Sure, Lance. I do think this question probably comes down to philosophy, and that's different for every person and for every parent-child relationship in terms of how much support you want to provide. In terms of the CARES Act or any legislation that's been passed, there's been nothing out there to suggest that lenders will give you any type of forbearance on loan payments. So it really would be negotiating with them to come up with a solution that is agreeable for both parties, and the lender may say, no, we're not going to give you any type of reprieve here on paying your payments, and they'd have to face the consequences of perhaps going into default. So so it comes back to philosophy. And so I would say if you're making gifts to children at any point throughout the year, this would be a good place to help them out. And you can gift up to $15,000 per person throughout the year and not face any gift tax consequences. So, from that perspective, I think there's quite a bit of help that could be provided if you're financially able to do so.
Yeah, good point, Matt. And I'll just add to that it may depend upon your child's job outlook going forward. If what we're experiencing right now is going to be temporary for your child, and they anticipate that their income will come back, then assisting them now might be a nice little Band-Aid you can assist them with. If this is a longer term issue though, and they're not able to meet their mortgage or auto payments on a regular basis, then maybe the answer to that question differs.
I'd extend too that, if anybody on this call or any of our clients are dealing with issues like that, that maybe aren't necessarily your issues, it's a family member's issues, we're happy to help. We want to support you in supporting other people as well. So give your planning team a call and ask those questions.
Yep, that's right. I know that periods like this can be a source of stress, no matter what your situation is. Whenever we have restrictions or we're confined, it's a stressful situation. Remember that it's for situations like this that you have a financial plan in place. You have a team at Severson Strege here to help you, talk you through this, and plan ahead for situations like this that may occur. So you have done the work ahead of time. You can rest easy. And if you're not resting easy, please don't hesitate to reach out to someone on your planning team. We're here to talk you through any questions or issues that you have. So with that, I'll thank everyone for attending this afternoon. Matt, thank you for helping me with the hosting duties.
You're welcome.
And we'll wish everyone a happy and healthy week. Take care.